Do you guys think Benjamin Netanyahu has been mistaken for 30 years, claiming that Iran is a year to 3 years away from a nuke? Or was he lying? The risk of this going to a real ground war, another war in the war on terrorism, let me be very clear when I say this. I don't know that America will survive this.
Sounds like pretty hyperbolic words there from Dave Smith that the U.S. might not survive a war with Iran, but if I know Dave, he'll have an interesting explanation as to why. This is in the context of a debate between Dave Smith and Konstantin Kisin on the recent military intervention between Israel and Iran, with the U.S., of course, supporting Israel. So this is going to be interesting to watch. Let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Dave, before we get to your response to that, just explain to people why you have called what Donald Trump is doing a betrayal and why you think he should be impeached.
Well, I think he has brought us into a war with Iran. Now, how much this war escalates, we will see. And I think that this is it is the most profoundly risky and reckless policy he could have pursued, or just about. I think this is very likely going to lead to a catastrophe, much like all of the other terror wars, including the one, Pierce, that you heroically led the opposition in the UK to in 2003, of course, referring to the war in Iraq. And as you remember well, Pierce, from that war, the justifications just kept constantly changing. And then when one fell away, they'd move to the next one. Oh, he was in on 9/11. Okay, he wasn't in on 9/11. But he's got weapons of mass destruction. Okay, he doesn't have weapons of mass destruction, but we have to liberate the people or bring democracy. And I've already seen that it's remarkable how sped up it is. I've already seen so many of the war hawks bouncing back and forth between all of these different justifications. But of course, in the end there, all of the justifications failed.
Yeah, this is so true. You know, we're really seeing 2003 and 2002 play out again before our very eyes. Dave is right that this has a chance to be a real catastrophe. In fact, right when Trump got elected, I said, you know, his approval rating's high for now, and it's going to stay high unless there's an economic crash or he gets us into a new war. It really seems like it's almost like someone's trying to sabotage this administration from within. You're seeing how this is splitting the MAGA base and creating a schism, and pretty much all the dissidents have jumped off board at this point. So Dave is right. This has a real chance not only to be a catastrophe in terms of foreign policy, but also a calamity for Trump himself and his chance to get his agenda passed.
Not only did he not have weapons of mass destruction, not only was he not in on 9/11, but we also didn't liberate the people. The worst thing that ever happened to the people of Iraq was George W. Bush's war there. And as far as Iran enriching up to 60%, yes, it's true that they only need, I think, between 3 to 5% for civilian nuclear purposes, and maybe something like around 20 to 25% for some medical needs. But that is what is known as a latent nuclear deterrent. There is another reason why they would have that. They want to demonstrate that they can get the bomb, but they don't have it right now to stop something like this happening. But the bottom line is that since 2007, our CIA has said they don't have nuclear weapons, and they're not striving to achieve them. Tulsi Gabbard, not only in her testimony, but in the Director of National Intelligence as her capacity serving that role, in the annual threat assessment just put out a couple months ago, reaffirmed the same thing. And so is the global community. Iran has been willing to negotiate this entire time. And maybe the negotiations haven't been successful, but even Benjamin Netanyahu, in his interview with Brett Baer the other day, couldn't even manage to lie and say that they've broken out and they're pursuing. He said maybe a year. The same thing he's been saying since I was 7 years old, lying over and over and over again because he wants a regime change war here. And he's said this in his own words, and so have all of the neoconservatives. Yeah. Look, right here on your show, Pierce, which I think might be the most fascinating moment in the history of Uncensored, when General Wesley Clark reaffirmed that not only had he seen the plans to overthrow 7 countries in 5 years, but that it went all the way back to the early 90s, and that it was revived, in his words, in a study paid for by the Israelis. They've gotten the 6 other ones. This is the 7th one. This war is not about nukes that Iran doesn't have.
Yeah, Dave is absolutely correct here. And he talks about, you know, the thresholds and the enrichment of the nuclear, I should say uranium for the nuclear program. Of course, Iran has nuclear energy, a nuclear energy program, and the citizens need that. The economy needs that to thrive. And indeed, Dave is absolutely accurate here that, and I can't blame the Iranians for this, by the way, enriching higher percentage of uranium to actually hang that potential out there while still not pursuing nuclear weapons. We know that even the CIA, the entity most likely to try to drag us into wars like they did in Iraq, that again we're seeing this kind of propaganda campaign play out just like it did in 2002 and 2003, and that's basically the crux of it. The Director of National Intelligence gave in her threat summary the clear, distinct statement that they aren't pursuing it. And I wouldn't trust the CIA at face value in almost any circumstance, but knowing that they're so incentivized and prone to misleading us on intelligence and drumming up false threats, and they're not in this case, I think that's pretty telling. So I'm totally with Dave here.
And just one more point I would make, as the great Scott Horton said the other day, look, I mean, even if they were developing nukes, which they're not, Truman knew that the Soviets were developing nukes. He didn't launch an aggressive war against them for it. And Johnson knew that Mao Zedong was developing nukes. He still didn't launch an aggressive war against the country. And the point is that you could sit here and say, just like they did with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, you could sit here and say, no, we're just going to have a no-fly zone. We won't have boots on the ground. We won't have this. Look, Iran has already demonstrated, in a few days that this war has been going on, that they're more capable than all of the other countries we picked on in the terror wars. They've already hit Israel and killed people there. What's going to happen when a few Americans get killed?
Well, we all know the U.S. will be drawn directly into the war. I mean, indirectly, we already are a part of it. We're bankrolling it. We've always bankrolled Israel during my entire lifetime, starting in like the late 40s or early 50s. So yeah, the U.S. is involved. The extent to which we're involved is a matter of debate. Trump's tried to kind of hang out there that, this is an Israeli-led strike. And then in more recent days, he's kind of boasted about it and said, called it like this operation is a joint operation. He's taken some ownership of it, and he's totally right about Iran's weapons capabilities. They have cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. They have much more technology, even relative to the time, than any of these other countries that the U.S. has gone to war with. So yeah, this is dangerous, and they can touch a lot of U.S. forces in the region. As Dave is saying, that would draw the U.S. into this war. And the sick and twisted thing is that Israel's incentivized to do that. So I would look out for a false flag attack here, knowing that the U.S. is guaranteed to join this as a hot war, all in, full bore. If that happens, I think there's going to be some kind of strike on our troops. And that's the biggest thing I would apprehend. And the thing that sucks is that they shouldn't be there in the first place. This is one of the biggest problems about having so many foreign military bases in the Middle East, is this is a constant threat of always drawing the U.S. into new wars there.
Hopefully this doesn't. But what's going to happen if that happens? What do you think Donald Trump's going to do?
That is an amazingly big question. Konstantin, your response to that?
Well, it's fascinating. So the Iranians are willing to negotiate, but the negotiations aren't going anywhere. That's a very strange way of looking at it. Look, there's so much to address there, Piers.
All right, with the negotiations, it's clear that that's what actually they were sabotaged internally. That's my view, because the Trump administration started out with a line of saying, hey, we want a new JCPOA that's a little bit more strict than the old JCPOA, because he has to say that because he threw out the old one and he needs reason to make it more strict. So no nuclear weapons program. You can enrich uranium. That's the starting point. And then as the negotiations went on, at some point, it changed from that to you can't enrich uranium at all. Well, that's a total non-starter and makes any kind of treaty between the two countries a total dead letter that no one would ever accept or be expected to accept. Imagine that. If a country was trying to tell the U.S. you can't enrich uranium for nuclear power, it just wouldn't fly, and their economy is so dependent on that. So if you're going to tank the negotiations that way, which it looks like happened at some point, it looks like Trump was complicit at some points in the last few days of getting us involved with this war and collaborating with Netanyahu. How much time preceded that decision is up for debate right now. A lot of people are doing it, but that seems clear. So yeah, the negotiations may have started out in earnest, but they didn't work because of the Trump administration. Iran's had the same perspective the whole time. They've been willing to negotiate. Why wouldn't they? They want to take the pretext off the table that Israel is now using to launch this war.
First of all, you've got to think about this and understand this from an Israeli perspective in the situation. A lot of people think that Israel has just launched the war in Iran. That's not how Israel sees this at all. Israel has been at war with Iran since October the 7th, when an Iranian proxy, Hamas, attacked them. On October the 8th, an Iranian proxy, Hezbollah, began to fire rockets into Israel. Then the Houthis, another Iranian proxy, began to attack shipping and also Israel. Right? Now, what has happened since then is Israel has eliminated those threats to, I was going to say deballed, but decapitated Hezbollah. They dealt with the threat of Hamas, and they are now in a position to deal with the threat they've always been concerned about. Now, why is Israel so concerned about this? Well, first of all, Iran has been saying for a very long time, they don't want regime change in Israel. They want the state of Israel not to exist. Now, think about the fact that in the post-October 7 world, they cannot take the risk that they're only enriching uranium to 60% because they want to threaten to have nuclear weapons. That is not something they can do. And by the way, Piers, there's something that people don't seem to understand about. You know, we struggle in the West. I really do think we all struggle in the West to understand the fundamentalist mindset. And let me give you an example of what the regime in Iran is like so that we can all understand.
All right, before he gets into this, I just want to say his demonstration of what constitutes a proxy. He basically said that Iran was already at war with Israel because they've armed Hezbollah, who attacked shortly after Hamas's attacks on October 11th. I believe Hezbollah began some attacks on October 8th. Well, if that's true, Israel is the proxy of the United States. And guess who armed Israel before Hezbollah or Hamas even existed? It's the United States. I think Hezbollah was formed in 82, and I think Hamas was formed in 87 or 89, sometime in the late 1980s. But from the late 40s, early 50s until now, Israel's been armed by the United States, and it's carried out lots of wars in the region. I think Israel's gone to war in some fashion or had some military excursion in like 4 or 5 of its neighbors just recently. So, yeah, if that's the definition of proxy, then the U.S. started it and armed Israel, and then I guess Israel was already at war with Iran preceding what he's saying. I mean, we can go back as long as he wants, but if that's your quality and characteristics of a proxy, well, it's a double standard.
What the threat here is. After the Islamic Revolution happened in Iran in 79, the war broke out between Iran and Iraq. And in that war, Iran was at a disadvantage. It was militarily backward. It wasn't financially able to deal with that. And you know what they did? They attempted to mitigate that by recruiting as many child soldiers as they could. We don't know how many because they didn't bother to count, but it's hundreds of thousands. And because some of them were too young and too weak to fight, they didn't send them to the front line. They sent them to sweep minefields with their own bodies. That is what this regime does. Now, if those people are willing to do that to their own children, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, what do you think they would do to the children of their enemies if they get a nuclear weapon or if they get close to, or if they're allowed to continue funding proxies around the Middle East in order to attack Israel as they've already done?
Dave Smith.
Okay, can I respond to some of this, Pierce? Because as I always insist when I come on your show, it's always ironically, I get called a moral relativist when I criticize Israel, but I'm the one who's always asking for an objective standard here that we can judge all sides on. Because it's just, you can just focus on the horrible things that Iran did in the 1980 war with Iraq, which Saddam Hussein launched, and the U.S. backed Saddam Hussein as he was using chemical weapons. And
so that justifies using children to walk into minefields?
No.
You just Kathy Newman'd him. That's crazy. That's such a crazy straw man.
That is not what I'm saying.
Okay,
let
so
me
what
finish
are you
my
saying?
point here. Instead of just straw manning, well, I was about to say, so
Okay.
let me finish it. Okay. By the way, Israel never killed any children, as you know, Pierce, right? They have the most
Israel
respect
is
for-
not sending its own children into minefields. It's a massive difference.
Okay, let me...
Yeah, we've seen the pictures and videos coming out of Gaza of children pulled out of the rubble. So let's just ignore talking about that for the sake of something that happened in a war between proxies, one of which the U.S. supported in the 1980s. That's exactly what Kisin is doing.
Let me finish my point, and then you can respond to it and see if you can take it on. Now, when you sit here and say that they've been at war with Iran since October 7th because Hamas is their proxies. What exactly, proxy means that I would think you have operational control over them or something like that.
Well,
It
actually,
seems like when it comes to
let me explain what I think that means, because I've been arguing that point in terms of understanding where Israel comes from on this, which is that there can be no doubt, I don't think, Dave, you would cast doubt on this, that Iran has financially and militarily given active and sustained support for a number of years to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, and to Hamas. I mean, you wouldn't dispute that.
Right. So, Pierce, then by your logic and Konstantin's logic, is Israel our proxy? They just attacked
exactly.
Iran.
Well, I would say that Israel is actually, you could well argue, given
absolutely.
the amount of support that America.
And by the way, Israel is much more the United States' proxy than Hezbollah is and the Houthis are to Iran by every metric in terms of how much money is given, the level of technology that's given, the level of intelligence that's given, the quality. By so much of a higher stretch is Israel our proxy than is Hezbollah Iran's.
Gives Israel militarily and economically, yes. I think.
Fine.
I mean,
fine.
look,
But
one
then-
person's
but then
ally
let's-
is another person's
Can I make some points on this?
proxy.
But hold on. Let me just.
Yeah, but so I think
Sorry.
ally,
Okay, but
proxy.
Can
they're
I
not,
flesh
they're not
out
that
your
different.
Dave? I'm very happy to hear a counter argument. Can I just flesh out Pierce's point a little bit, if that's okay? So
Sure.
Here's what we know. According to the State Department's own figures, Iran gives Hamas about $100 million a year. Latest.
The U.S. gives Israel $4 billion a year in years not with an October 7. It gave it about $20 billion last year. So that's like a drop in the bucket. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying the scale of this and the proportionality is so far out of whack in the direction of Israel that this is almost not even worth discussing.
Figures. They've been funding Hamas since the early 1990s. Yahya Sinwar said in 2017 that Iran is the single biggest military and financial backer of Hamas's military wing. In September 2023, a month before October the 7th, 500 Hamas fighters and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters were being trained by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard abroad. I can't remember if it's in Lebanon or in Iran proper. And there are numerous chronicled, documented meetings between senior commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Hamas and Hezbollah fighters in the lead up to it. What do you think they were doing? Talking about world peace and swapping hummus recipes? This is something that they've been involved in very heavily, and they continue to be involved in. And Hamas and Hezbollah are the sword hanging over Israel's neck that Iran has used in order to prevent the very thing that's happening now.
So essentially, he's arguing the same thing that Dave already agreed with. Dave was asked directly by Pierce whether Iran funds those three quote-unquote proxies. He said yes. But again, this is inconsequential in comparison to the original argument, which was, well, that's their proxy, so they've always been at war with Israel. Well, then no, the United States funds Israel and what it's done to its neighbors. And Israel's done targeted strikes within Iran. So this is just circular, weird argumentation that only holds Israel to a special standard that it would exempt all other countries from being able to qualify for.
Dave?
Okay, so to be clear here, it's an outrage that Iran has sold weapons and given money to Hamas, and therefore Hamas is their proxy. Yet, as we all know, Pierce, and me and you have discussed this, 2 weeks before October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu sends the head of Mossad to Qatar to make sure that the funding to Hamas continues. Yet, is Hamas now a proxy of Israel?
This is an incredible point, and it's true. Like, it almost sounds like a conspiracy theory. If you didn't know about the history of this, and trust me, the corporate media does not reveal it. Very few people talk about it, certainly not American politicians. But going back many, many years, Hamas was propped up financially by the Likud party, by Netanyahu. Netanyahu's admitted it, kind of off the record. Both Haaretz and the Times of Israel has reported on this. Those are two of the most reputable newspapers in Israel, to the extent that any newspaper is reputable anymore. But it hasn't even been flatly denied by many of the individuals involved. And the reason for this is because Netanyahu believed that if he props up this extremist terrorist group, there'll be no acceptance of the idea that there can be a two-state solution. He thought it would essentially prevent that. It mostly, I think, has. And this is why. This is why Netanyahu has funded Hamas. And I guess by this definition, they're a proxy of Israel too.
Is Israel at war with itself?
Well, I
way,
think on that point, I certainly think that Benjamin Netanyahu, when this is all over, is going to have a monumental day of reckoning, not just in the corruption courts, but I think he's going to have a monumental day of reckoning about how he allowed this to happen on his watch, how Mossad so spectacularly dropped the ball. No one can give me a good explanation for why they can carry out this kind of attack on Hezbollah with the pages.
That's true, and the Times of Israel reported that Mossad knew up to a year in advance that this was going to happen. This is from a famous article. Again, came out. It's rarely brought up in the United States, but this was a spectacular intelligence failure in Israel when it seems like they already knew this was going to happen. There's so many oddities to that, and that story just went out into the ether once Israel decided to just wreak a bloodbath in Gaza, and that's what we got from it.
And carry out so precise an attack in Iran, but didn't apparently know that Hamas was spending 20 years building a tunnel system and didn't know 3,000 of them were about to pour over the border. I will never defend Netanyahu in this. I think he's going to be a busted flush. I suspect he sees this attack on Iran as being a chance to avoid being a busted flush for a little longer than it might have been the case. But there's going to be a day of reckoning for him. And the fact that he actively encouraged billions of dollars to be funneled to Hamas to create a divide and rule strategy between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority has also turned out to be one of the most catastrophically wrong things that an Israeli leader could possibly have done. So, look, that's where I sit with Netanyahu.
None of this makes Hamas an Israel proxy, right?
Okay, fine. Well, yeah, I mean, it did kind of by the definition you guys gave me.
They're not the primary source of their funding or support.
So he just shifted the goalpost to say that the primary source of their funding is the only qualification that would make it a proxy. Well, again, in that definition, Israel's the proxy of the U.S., and it is by many magnitudes of a greater proxy than what Hamas and Hezbollah are to Iran. Easily.
Okay, fine. Okay, it's got to be primary, just being... Okay, fine, whatever. Anyway, the point is this, right? Obviously, right now, Israel has taken out much of the Hezbollah leadership. The Houthis have been bombed. I think there's still a bit of a problem for them. They've been absolutely leveling Gaza. And so they think this is the moment. And of course, Bashar al-Assad fell as well. So now they think this is the moment for regime change in Iran. It's the same reason why people like Ben Shapiro were celebrating when Bashar al-Assad fell. Now the Shiite crescent is no longer supplying weapons from Iran to Hezbollah. But I'm not an Israeli. I'm an American. I'm not cheering when the emir of Al-Qaeda takes over in Syria. And listen,
yeah, this is a really good point. Everyone talks about how, Assad was such a threat to Israel and Netanyahu hated him. Syria was one of the countries on the list that was part of the clean break that both Israel and the United States wanted to overthrow in a regime change operation. But guess what happened? That put Al-Qaeda in power. Jilani, who's now there in power, essentially, I believe the president is his title there, al-Shara he's also called, he was part of ISIS, and he actually came from ISIS in Iraq, linked directly with Al-Qaeda, taking power there, and fundamentalists there now executing Christians. If you're an American and you went to war with Al-Qaeda over 9/11, he is the enemy and not necessarily Assad. Assad was treacherous, don't get me wrong, but Assad was actually, in some regards, like protecting religious minorities. He was much more secular, and he didn't attack the United States. So our perspectives and Israelis' perspectives might differ, and that's all right. In a world that we're not attached to the hip in Israel, our perspective actually might win the day instead of theirs. Instead of overthrowing Assad, which USAID sank $15 billion into. We know that. That's documented.
Whatever you put the risk at here, which if this thing keeps escalating, the risk of this going to a real ground war, another war in the war on terrorism, let me be very clear when I say this. I don't know that America will survive this. We went into the terror wars in a much stronger place than we're going into this one. And this is a much tougher opponent than Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi. We didn't go into the terror wars $37 trillion in debt. We didn't go into the terror wars with the cultural and political and racial divides. We have mass protests in the streets right now over Donald Trump trying to enforce his immigration policy. This is going to be, this has the potential to be an utter disaster. And why should any American or British person, for that matter, why should any of us support this war? Because Israel thinks it's in their interest. Israel has attacked. Well, I would argue. Okay.
Absolutely, Dave Smith is on fire right here. This is exactly my thoughts too. Why get embroiled in another entangling alliance caused war in the Middle East, where our troops are held in many bases along the Arabian Peninsula, near the Suez Canal, very close to Iran, like within very close distance, putting them in danger over this war for Israel? When Iran has no capability to attack us, even if you're talking about the nuclear weapons program, I won't concede that they have one. They definitely don't have one. Even the CIA is saying they don't have one. Even Mossad is saying that. Even Netanyahu is saying, oh, they're a year away. Like he said, since I was an infant, just like Dave said earlier. Even if that was the case, they are of no threat to the United States. You need a delivery system to, deploy a nuclear weapon, either from a submarine or an aircraft carrier or a ballistic missile, and they don't have the capability to project that to the U.S. This is not our fight. This is not our war. This is insane, and he's right to say that they're more technologically advanced than Iraq ever was, or any of the other countries that the U.S. participated in toppling.
I would argue it's not just in Israel's interest. I think Iran is an evil regime that oppresses its people, that has funded terrorism.
So was Saddam Hussein.
Well, yeah, I agree. But in Saddam Hussein's case, I never believed.
Saddam Hussein never funded terrorism.
Well, I never believed that Saddam Hussein had WMD.
I
think the difference
there was no terrorism in Iraq until we got rid of Saddam, actually.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, I said that before I heard Piers Morgan make that point. I was saying about being a brutally oppressive,
So just saying here, and I haven't studied this very closely, but some do claim that Saddam did support various forms of terrorism throughout the world. That might have been part of the CIA propaganda machine. It likely was. It's probably, a justification for going to war with him. But I don't think it's like exclusively thought of that he never did. Now, he might not have. I would concede that I don't fully know the answer to it, but I know people have argued that he did, and that was what the neocons like Kisin was arguing in the run-up to the war in Iraq. Many of the people he really respects, Douglas Murray was certainly doing that, by the way. I'm not trying to, say that was right. I'm saying that was an argument that was made.
I think you can't hold any truck for this Iranian regime. I think a lot of Iranian people would agree with that. I think they would love to get rid of them. I think that Israel has every right to feel threatened by Iran's tentacles and the way they supported 3 different terror groups right on their border. So I'm not saying that you're not right, that this might all backfire. Let
me just ask you.
I'm not saying it may not backfire. I'm just saying I do understand why Israel has decided to do it now. I think they sense that Iran's regime has never been weaker because of what's happened in Syria, because of what happened to Hezbollah. What's been the most significant moment of the last week? Probably Hezbollah saying we're not getting involved in this, right? So, that to me was a very significant moment. And that may well have emboldened not just Israel to continue pummeling Iran, but also may have emboldened Trump to think, well, actually, if we're ever going to deal with this regime, now is the moment. Now, that's not to say, Dave, that you're not right, that this could all backfire horrendously. And if America gets sucked into a ground war, then it will be a complete nightmare. I've got no doubt about that.
Yes, but would you also concede, though, that if you allow Iran to enrich uranium, that also could backfire?
Yes, right? I was about to say that. And also I was about to say that Russia is now making pretty worrying noises that if America gets involved, it's not going to tolerate it. So
yeah, that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest angle a few people are talking about, that Iran is an ally of Russia. It is a BRICS country. And this would even alienate further the United States from Russia during a time, by the way, that Trump made one of his chief agenda items to establish peace in Ukraine and to end that war. I mean, that hasn't happened. I'm very pessimistic that it'll happen anytime soon based on what's happened there. It's basically status quo Biden policy, except for the fact that they are having discussions with Russia, which is good. But otherwise, the money keeps flowing through, and Trump doesn't seem to have the desire to withdraw it. So this is pushing BRICS countries further together, polarizing them, and jeopardizing a chance for peace with Russia.
You can't ignore that, given what's happening in Ukraine. But yeah, I think in your point, Konstantin, yes, I when I saw the IAE report, I read it and I thought they've gone from 3% to 60% uranium enrichment. And there's only one reason you would do that. Either you take Dave's view, which is they're doing that because they want to have a form of nuclear deterrent without actually having a bomb. Or if you're Israel, you're like, these people have been funding terrorism against us for decades. And now they've gone from 3% to 60%, way more than is needed for any civilian use. Clearly, they are on a fast track here to be a nuclear power.
Okay, well, it takes 90% to get a nuclear weapon, and enriching uranium is not the only thing that you have to do to build a nuclear weapon. Look, I'm not, a physicist. I'm not an expert in this area, but it takes more than just enriching uranium. I'll probably never know all the secrets to it. I'm not smart enough for that, and that's not really my wheelhouse. But that's not the only thing it takes, and despite that, our intelligence services, including Israel's, is saying they don't have a nuclear weapon. They're not on the fast track to get it. Netanyahu's saying a year. Tulsi Gabbard said there's no evidence they even restarted that program since 2003. I'm an American. I don't trust the CIA, but I darn well know that the CIA is prone to making stuff up to get us into wars. And for whatever reason, they're not this time. So that's telling to me.
And we cannot allow that to happen. So I do. Well, let Konstantin respond first. But I do. That's why I do understand.
Well, let's be honest.
Why Israel feels the way it does.
Well, exactly. And let's be honest about something here, Piers. The three of us are sitting in comfortable air-conditioned studios on the other side of the world from the region where this is happening. We have the luxury to pontificate about the real reason that Iran is enriching uranium to near weapons grade. Israel does not have the ability to get this wrong and then go, well, I apologize, I got this one wrong, as Dave has done with President Trump. He supported him being elected, and now he's go, I got it wrong, guys, let's impeach him. Israel, if it gets this wrong, gets annihilated. They do not have the luxury of that. Now, Dave, I think the point you make about the American people, I have the greatest respect for the American people, and they should determine the course of America themselves. They've elected Donald Trump, and that is the reality. No one here, Piers found out, I think, with some history, that Americans don't like being told what to do by foreigners. And I'm certainly not going to do that. It's up to the American people. I know the American people don't want boots on the ground, and neither do I. And neither do sensible people, I think. I think the extent of Americans' involvement should be to help Israel defend itself against the missile attacks and let them get the job done themselves. I agree with you. This is Israel's war. They should prosecute it to the best of their ability, and they should deal with the threat that they face from Iran. I don't want a massive involvement of the West. I don't think that's what we need. And by the way, Piers, just one quick point, slightly tangential, but not necessarily important. For those people who care about what's happening in Ukraine, this is brilliant for Ukraine because Iran has been one of the biggest suppliers of drones, the suicide drones that have been raining down in Ukrainian cities and killing civilians and military personnel there. The fact that Iran and Russia are now having to deal with this situation takes a lot of pressure off Ukraine, and it's good for that reason as well.
This is brilliant for Ukraine because it prolongs the possibility that that war continues, that conscription's expanded, that they send innocent people plucked off the streets into a fruitless, senseless war. It's good for you, brilliant for Ukraine. This is madness. Ukraine has no chance of getting back the Donbass territory in large amounts. It's basically under Russian hands since almost the very start, with very few palpitations that have changed that balance of territory. So this is crazy. This imperils the Ukrainian people to keep this war going, keep the animosities with Russia high, and prevent the prospect of peace for sure.
All right, Dave, the one thing I would quibble with about what you said earlier was about the way that Iran has responded. They always threaten annihilation when they get attacked, right? Or when they're involved in any kind of skirmish. We've heard it towards the end of last year and nothing really happened. We've heard it again now. And although, yes, they've got through the Iron Dome several times, they've killed some civilians in Tel Aviv. This is indisputable. So they technically have done better in terms of their revenge attack than other countries have fared against Israel. I accept that. But I also think we are far removed from seeing any kind of, huge resistance coming out of Iran. In fact, what you're seeing is their bluff potentially getting called here, that a lot of it has been rhetoric built on sand, literally, and that they don't actually have the military capability to even tackle a country 1/10 its size in terms of population, let alone if the United States was to get involved. So I think what you're seeing is actually the opposite of the way you characterized it. I don't think you're seeing a massive response from Iran. I think you're seeing as good as they can do, and it's not very much.
Well, look, I mean, this is what remains to be seen, and we don't know. But in 2007, when Dick Cheney was trying to push George W. Bush into war with Iran, it was the Pentagon who stopped George W. Bush from doing it. And it was them who said that we do not have escalation dominance over Iran, essentially meaning that we have, we still have thousands of troops in Iraq right now. We have bases and embassies all throughout the region that they can touch. Now, we'll see, I guess, Pierce. I guess we're going to play this game. I guess we're going to play this incredibly risky game.
I agree, it's high risk.
For no reason, essentially, from the United States of America's interests. And, look, this stuff, I'm sorry, I just find this to be too ridiculous. All of the intelligence is saying that they don't have nuclear weapons and they're not pursuing nuclear weapons. There is one country, one government in the Middle East that is not a member of the non-proliferation treaties that has nuclear weapons secretly. And it ain't Iran, it's Israel. It is so ridiculous.
Well, I agree.
Yeah, and that's the worst kept secret in all of geopolitics, by the way. So how ironic and hypocritical is it that the country with a secret nuclear weapons program is attacking a country on the basis that that country is developing a secret nuclear weapons program? It's just so absurd. It's almost hard to believe.
It's absurd, as you know. I agree. Look, I agree. I don't understand how Israel is allowed to continue pretending they don't have nuclear weapons.
Also,
But what are you saying? Are you saying Iran should develop nuclear weapons to compensate for that reality? Or
No. What I'm saying.
Okay, so Dave's saying no, but I'm saying, yeah, I would be incentivized if I was running that regime to get nuclear weapons because of how North Korea was treated versus Libya. Gaddafi was toppled by the U.S. after giving up his nuclear weapons program. North Korea has them, and they can't be toppled. I mean, you could maybe topple that regime, but at great cost, and that's why even the neocons barely talk about that anymore. Iran's the fantasy to overthrow.
What I'm saying is this, okay? Whenever you guys talk about this, even already, and Pierce, I got to say, I thought you were a little bit guilty of this right after October 7th, understandably perhaps so, but even right now, whenever we talk, it's all about the Israeli perspective, as if we're all Israelis. Oh, Israel can't take the risk that they have 60% enrichment. Israel can't get this wrong the way I could change my mind about supporting Donald Trump. I guess Israel can get it wrong when they lure America into a war, when they pump out propaganda saying that Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. That's okay when they get that one wrong, but they can't get this one wrong. Okay, fine.
Why are you blaming Israel for that? It was your own government lying to us about that. I was protesting against the war in Iraq exactly the same way you and Pierce
I think we all oppose it.
But it was our governments lying to us. It wasn't about Israel. Why is everything that happens in the world the fall of Israel Day?
So he's literally trying to accuse Dave Smith of being too easy on George Bush and Dick Cheney and Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld, those that pushed that war. This is insane. He knows nothing about Dave. Dave thinks they're all war criminals. So I can't even believe I'm watching this part here.
This is such a blatant straw man. I didn't say everything in the world is the fault of Israel. I'm saying they were also guilty of this.
But why are you putting the emphasis on them when George W. Bush and Tony Blair were using their bully pulpits to make this point to a far wider audience than some guy in the Middle East called Benjamin Netanyahu?
If you think that I am removing any of the blame from George W. Bush or Tony Blair, I assure you you're wrong and you don't know what you're talking about.
This is wild. He's saying that Dave Smith isn't blaming George Bush and Dick Cheney for the Iraq War. I can't even believe I'm watching this. It's just too preposterous.
I've been blasting them for years. They're war criminals who should be in The Hague.
I agree.
That is not the issue. We are talking specifically about the nation of Israel right now, so I'm talking about their responsibility. And why is it, by the way, that this is always a one-way street? You know, I hear all the hawks constantly being like, Iran said this, Iran threatened this. What about the threats in the other direction? Maybe Iran feels like they don't have a choice to not. So look, Muammar Gaddafi, Iran is on the list of 7 countries that are supposed to be overthrown. The U.S. government went and overthrew both of their next door neighbors, invaded the countries and destroyed them after putting Iran on the axis of evil list when they had nothing to do with 9/11. And then when Muammar Gaddafi denuclearized, they went in there and overthrew him in the most violent, brutal way, was sodomized to death by a pack of madmen. Maybe Iran also feels that they can't get this one wrong. Why are we doing this? This is a country that poses no threat to the United States of America. And if you guys want to try to hang on the fence here and go, hey, I'm not telling Americans what to do, I think Israel should do it on their own. But that's just a fantasy land. They're not doing it on their own. They're doing it with our weapons, with our intelligence support, with our money, with us protecting them from a retaliation strike, and, at least possibly, with our president using negotiations to dupe Iran into thinking that they weren't at risk. I mean, that's what Benjamin Netanyahu says, and that's what some other reporting says. Maybe that's not the case, but either way, he pretended like he was afterward. So no, none of this is being done without America. This is about a regime change war. All of them said it in their own words. They're on record. Do you guys think Benjamin Netanyahu has been mistaken for 30 years, claiming that Iran is a year to 3 years away from a nuke? Or was he lying?
Yeah, man, that's Dave at his best on fire. He's so accurate here. This is a fantasy to believe that, oh yeah, Israel's just going to take care of this on their own. No, they're tied at the hip of the U.S. The U.S. is already in deep. Trump possibly collaborated with Netanyahu to tank these negotiations just so Netanyahu can get away with this decapitation strike. That might not have been successful otherwise because it certainly caught the Iranians off guard, and everyone should admit that. They killed some of the top brass. They did it in a residential area in Tehran where innocents died, of course, but hey, no one ever thinks about them. We'd hear every name if they were Israelis killed, but not innocents in Tehran. But the key is that the U.S. shouldn't be involved in it. Dave's totally right there. Netanyahu's been lying for 30 years. 30 years. Many different examples about how close Iran is to getting a nuke. He's basically said they're getting a nuke next month since I was a child. Like Dave said, I'm with him. I'm about his same age, but that's right. So we'll have to see how this turns out. I'm very concerned about a false flag attack targeting our troops. I don't think Iran would target U.S. troops because they know that means doomsday. And I'm not sure that Israel has the capability of, regime changing that government without the U.S. They're banking on the hope that the U.S. gets drawn into this war, and that's the most catastrophic thing I can possibly imagine. I think Dave's right. It could end up being worse than Iraq, worse than Syria, worse than Libya, a prolonged occupation. I dread even thinking about that. It's just horrific to think about. But I do want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below. Will the U.S. get dragged completely into this war, do bombings on their own, maybe even put ground troops down? Let me know down below. I want to hear from you on that. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Please consider joining me as a Patreon patron or YouTube member to support the channel. I'd really appreciate that. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.